So, we've had 2 great keynotes so far, and I think we're about to have another great keynote. Our speaker is Mark Schwartz, and he is here from the government to help us. One of the great things about SATURN is that it mixes together a lot of us who do design in different contexts. One theme that's been running through this conference has been the role of an architect on a small, agile team, an architect doing coding, and so forth. We have to remember, we have a lot of people working in safety-critical systems where that might not be the ideal model. We also have big organizations that do different kinds of architecture. What Mark's going to talk to us about, and he's going to give us a bunch of hands-on experience, is what if you have a very large organization and it's very bureaucratic and it's siloed, and how do you start transforming that into something that's more effective? So with that, I'm very proud to announce Mark, and looking forward to the keynote.
So I'm in the peculiar position of giving the closing keynote of a conference that I unfortunately wasn't able to attend. So I was sitting thinking about it and worrying a little bit that I might say something that all of you know is really stupid because you've just spent 3 days learning that it's a stupid idea. And then I thought, actually, what I should be worried about is that I'm going to wind up saying exactly the same thing that other people have said before me. And so I worried about that for a little while, and then it hit me, you know, brilliant idea. How about if I don't express any opinions whatsoever for attribution, and I just talk about my experiences a little bit in the government? You know, government people really don't like to speak for attribution anyway, so it kind of fits right in. So I'm gonna try to tell you a little bit about sort of a train of thought and how it worked itself out as we did some projects, and the learnings that we got from it, or at least the learnings I think we got from it, or maybe a better way to think about it is some hypotheses I can state now and require further testing or something like that. So I'm going to try to do that and have a little bit of fun with my experiences in the government. So first of all, for context, I am the CIO of US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And you probably think that sounds like the name of another government agency that you've heard of, or it sounds a little bit familiar. We're actually one of 3 agencies that deal with immigration. There's also ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and CBP, Customs and Border Protection. USCIS is the organization that processes applications for different types of immigration benefits. So each year we receive about 7 million applications. These are applications for naturalization or for green cards. The H-1B applications come to us, and a range of different things: refugees, asylees, temporary protected status. In our organization, first of all, I should say something up front, which is that we're part of the Department of Homeland Security. And this is relevant for our discussion because it means that we have 2 tiers of oversight, 2 tiers of governance. We have, especially when it comes to architecture, we have enterprise architecture in USCIS, that's our agency. We have enterprise architecture in DHS, and everybody wants to tell everybody else what to do. That's just the way it works. We have about 20,000 employees in the agency. The IT organization is about 450 federal employees and about 1,500 contractors. We manage about 70 legacy IT systems, and the 3 projects that I'm going to tell you about, which are new things that we're building now, and they have different characteristics. So what I want to do is try to explain how we thought about architecture in each of these situations and where it led us and what we've tried so far. So about 3 years ago now, probably, we became 100% agile. It was like magic one day. I issued a policy. It wasn't actually a policy, it was a management instruction, because it turns out that policies have to be reviewed by a lot of people, and I didn't really want anybody to review this one. So I issued a management instruction that said, from now on, all IT projects are agile. And that was it. It was as easy as that. There were actually a couple of complications. We defined what it meant to be agile, and we thought a lot about how to do that, and decided that there were 8 core practices that we thought were the essential practices. If anybody's interested, I could get you the list. And we didn't say you have to be agile, we said you have to follow these 8 practices, and we had a business justification for why each practice was a good thing, and some references in case people wanted to learn more about them. But we said, unless you get a waiver from the CIO, there always has to be some way out, but unless you get a waiver, you have to use these 8 practices when you're delivering an IT system. The other slight complication was that we're unionized, so the union also had to approve this policy. And so we had a number of fun months trying to explain what agile development was to the union and why the bargaining unit employees should be happy that we're doing this and so on. But we were agile. And what we've done since then is we've been maturing our practice a lot, and now everything that we do that's new, really, we're building in AWS, in the public cloud, and we're using a continuous delivery, continuous integration sort of approach, and we're starting to adopt what I would consider to be real DevOps practices. It's new to us, though, so there's still a lot of experimentation for us. So the 3 projects that I want to tell you about, the first one we call our transformation project. This is a mammoth project. This is one of those government projects that you read about in the newspapers. It's been, 2006, I think, is when it started. So it's been going for 9 years to build a system. It's planned to go for another 4 years. It has been quite a disaster at different points in its history, and we've been working on turning it around. I consider it pretty well turned around at this point. It's a large project. There are about 15 development teams, but that sort of understates things. Each of those teams is about 9 or 10 people. We also have a bunch of affiliated teams that are working in concert with those teams in a way that I'll explain in a minute. We have about 100 federal employees full-time working on it, product owners, release managers, and a number of other roles that we have. The project it has a life cycle cost estimate, which you have to be very careful with these words, but life cycle cost estimate of $2.6 billion, $2.9 billion now. The thing about that cost estimate, this is a little tricky. If you read the newspaper articles, they will tell you that our budget has gone from $500 million to $1.9 billion to $2.9 billion. As I said, the words are very important to pay attention to. The life cycle cost estimate includes development costs plus a projection of how much it's going to cost to maintain the system in operation. And our original life cycle cost estimate was for 10 years of operation. Now, who knows what they're going to be spending in 10 years of operation on a major system that runs an organization. So there's a lot of attempts to project what it's going to look like way into the future. But what made our budget go from $1.9 billion to $2.9 billion was mostly the fact that the rules changed and they said we should estimate our life cycle cost estimates 20 years into the future, which obviously increases the price a lot. But I'm giving you these numbers just to give you a sense of scope of commitment to this. And one of the things I would like to convey here is that the questions that we're dealing with here are big, important questions. We're talking about how the US federal government spends its IT dollars and how we can change that and how we can make the most of those IT dollars. And so here is something that is, in some sense, worth about $3 billion that we're working on. The second project that I'm going to tell you about we call MyUSCIS. And the idea of the MyUSCIS project is we're trying to change how we interact with people online, with our customers or our applicants. It's actually applicants and the lawyers who represent them for the most part. And we had a very good marketing consulting, brand consulting firm, IDEO, come in and work with us on design and what the user interaction could look like. and we're starting to roll this into our system. So it's a very user-facing sort of thing. Much smaller project. This is 2 Agile teams, and it's also in AWS. The transformation project, just to give you an idea of what we're working with, going back to my first project here, it's built on a stack that is mostly Java-based, Spring, Hibernate, sort of a standard open source platform set. And it has a continuous integration system that is your usual Git and Jenkins and Chef for deployments. That's the big transformation program, this MyUSCIS project, also in Amazon Web Services, Ruby on Rails stack, beautiful continuous delivery system, sort of textbook magic. And we even have a bit of a chaos monkey going in production, periodically killing VMs to see what happens. The third project that I'm going to talk about is our Did It project. Don't ask what it stands for. I think it's Digital Innovation and Development, something like that. The idea of this project, the challenge that we face is we have distributed locations all over the country, and we have rogue software development going on everywhere. I don't know anything about it, of course. I don't know anything about the 506 rogue applications that are out there. To shut these rogue applications down, if I happen to know about them, would be traumatic for the agency because this is what's actually used to run the business every day. So knowing that I couldn't really shut them down, the idea was if I can provide a way to create applications very quickly and small teams of developers with a decentralized governance model, I could put them out at these locations across the country, give them a platform to work on where they could develop really quickly. I could try to get out ahead of these rogue application development efforts. I could work with the business leaders in those locations whenever they had a need, try to snap something out really quickly. So that was the idea of it, and we're going in interesting directions with this that I'll explain a little bit more. So the 3 projects, if you look at them, we've got the humongous transformation project, we've got the very user-facing small project, and then we got this thing that is not so much a project or a system, it's a concept in how we're going to work with our users. There's always the problem when you talk about DevOps of making sure that we're all talking about the same thing. I think people, it's not so much that people have different understandings of it or different definitions, it's more that people express it in different ways. And so I'd like to express what I think our goals are in moving to a DevOps practice, because that's going to impact, I think, how we talk about architecture. So I see 2 goals primarily. One of them has to do with responsiveness. For me, it's responsiveness to the business. I'm a CIO, to the mission needs of the organization. And I think of this as DevOps pipeline is intended to reduce cycle time to the absolute minimum. Cycle time, lead time is probably a better term for it. We have a business need, or in our case, a mission need. We want to get to a deployed capability. There's a time in between those, and we want to shrink that as small as possible. And you can't do that if you're just focused on the software development part of things. You have to have your team that includes all of the functions working together throughout. You have to have a fast pipe to production, a lot of these other things that come along with DevOps. So first part has to do with reducing cycle times dramatically in our case from how many years long is this transformation project? It's going to be about 12 years altogether. So we've had requirements that have been there since the beginning. Our cycle time for those requirements will be something on the order of 12 years to get to all of them. It's unbelievable, right? So responsiveness, goal 1. Second goal is quality. And I use the term quality in a very, very broad way here. For me, security is quality. Compliance with Section 508, which is accessibility for people with disabilities. Fit to user needs is an aspect of quality. I think of all of these things as having to do with quality. And the critical thing in a DevOps practice is short feedback cycles, constant short feedback cycles, not only during the development process, but also feedback from production into development. feedback from, I think of it even bigger, feedback not just on how your production system is running, but the business value that's being gained from the system, feeding that back into your process. So to me, DevOps comes down to these kind of two things, responsiveness and quality. At least that's the way I like to think about it. All right, architecture. So I come from the government. I can tell you about what architecture looks like in the government. I don't know how it looks in your organizations. But in the government, architecture, primarily the model that's been in place, number of characteristics. The first one is it's all about governance and compliance. We have architects, and they make sure that every project is done the right way. I like to call this the across the street aspect. This is literally the case. We have co-located development teams. We have a lot of them. And then we have enterprise architects across the street. And makes a big difference, right? Because if you're not co-located, then you're other. You know, you're the guys over there who have to approve everything. A lot of what we call enterprise architecture is really about standardization. So we have a technical reference model that is our model in USCIS and one for DHS. And the technical reference model says what products people use. And if you want to add a new architectural component to that model, you fill out a request form. It goes to the gods of architecture. They do something with it, and you get back a signed piece of paper that says, okay, it's okay to use it. So we use Internet Explorer as our browser. That's our browser, Internet Explorer. We use, let's say, Java for developing our application. That's the platform. The enterprise architecture governance process is really about making sure that we stay within the bounds of what's been approved, or we add work if you want to go outside those bounds. And then the last characteristic I'll point out is that I say it's in line with cycle time. What I mean is, since one of our goals is to reduce cycle time, it's important that the architectural governance process is part of that cycle time and causes wait times and causes an extension of that cycle time. So this is the old model that we're coming from. And I think you can see with goals of trying to speed up our cycle time and have short feedback cycles and the other things that I'm expecting from DevOps, that there's a problem here. There's a conflict. The two things don't really fit well together. I like to think about the standardization question. I like to cause trouble. You might have guessed that. So the standardization one is always a good fight for me. I think we all know the benefits of standardizing on a set of platforms. So we're just using Internet Explorer, we're just using Java, whatever. Obvious advantages, it's Java, so all we need to do is get Java programmers. All of our systems then are maintainable. If somebody goes and writes a new system using the mean stack, well, we don't have mean stack programmers available to us. We can try to get economies when we're purchasing. If we have to buy an off-the-shelf product and we have a big volume of one product, we can reduce our costs. We can make things easier for end-user support, for the help desk, we might have fewer images that we need to have available to load up on different machines. There are lots of benefits of standardization. And it's taken as a given that that's a good thing, that we want to standardize. I don't think so, actually. I think we often miss out on what the costs are of standardizing. I'm going to tell you about what those costs are. First of all, the idea of a set of standards, we know it's going to become stale very quickly. Things are changing very quickly. Best practice moves on very quickly. I think beyond that, anytime you constrain a problem, you're reducing the size of the solution space, you're getting a suboptimal solution. And that's exactly what's happening with imposing standards. You're constraining the solution space for the development teams. maybe there's another platform they could be using that'll make it quicker for them to create the user interface part. Maybe they shouldn't be using Java there, maybe they should be using Rails there. Maybe the biggest factor for us, though, has been we're starting to bring in people that are used to working in other types of environments. We have a big initiative now to hire from leading technology companies or hire the same sorts of people who are working at leading technology companies. And they come in and they say, we want to use Slack or HipChat or something. And we say, well, it's not on the technical reference model, you know. It's not acceptable. You know, we have a choice. If we want to attract people who are used to working in environments where they have lots and lots of flexibility and nothing getting in their way when they can find a good solution, then we can't have this sort of standardization or knee-jerk standardization. We have to really weigh the benefits, I think. And then the final thing I'll point out about standardization is it imposes a cost in your process. You have to have checkpoints to make sure everybody's using the standards. And it imposes that cost even if people are using the standards. You still have to go through somebody checking to make sure you are. So it imposes a cost throughout everything that you're doing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't standardize, of course, but that there's a very real trade-off for me, and I think we should be making conscious decisions around, oh, I just said something for attribution here. I said I wasn't going to do that. I'm going to get back to our little history. I like that one, though. I can usually get an argument. Is there anybody want to argue with me on this one? Yeah. Not yet. Okay. Afterwards, maybe. So our transformation program. This is the big one, the big monstrosity. And we were setting it up, and we were trying to decide now, we're worried. We've got 15 teams. They're going to be working in parallel on the same code base, on the same problems. How are we going to handle architecture here? How are we going to make sure that each team isn't creating its own design patterns and using its own platforms and whatever? On top of that, it's going to have to interface with something like 30 different legacy systems. How are we going to make sure that we can put all the pieces together? Are we going to want to make some decisions like if the new development goes in this direction, do we want to go back to the legacy systems and make changes around that? So we knew that there was going to be a difficulty here, that we didn't really have a good model to work from. We also have to do everything through contracts. The US government, we don't have a lot of technical people on staff. We do contracts to get all the technical skills. And there's a long lead time in putting together contracts. So we kind of had to make decisions about what this was all going to look like so that we would know what contracts to create and how to set up the environment and the controls in those contracts and so on. So we set it up just as a, let's try this. Let's see if this works. We set it up with 15 or so development teams where the development teams had development skills and testing skills, security skills, user interface design skills, especially around accessibility. Those were the skills on the development teams. We set up a team that was going to be responsible for the code integration pipeline, essentially. They were going to manage Jenkins and Gradle and Chef and the health of the pipeline in general and be able to report on it. Various reasons why we decided that had to be a separate team. And then we said, we need a team that's going to focus on architecture. We don't know exactly how it's going to fit together with everything. But we set up a contract we call ADS, Architecture and Design Services. And we brought on a team that was our ADS team that was somehow going to work with the development teams and do architecture. The original thought, the way we set it up out of the gate, was that first we had a team that would pilot the architecture that we thought we were going to use. You can think of this as sort of architectural runway. They played around with the architecture. They figured out what was going to work, what wasn't going to work, where we needed, what design patterns we were going to use, where we needed code written to kind of glue pieces together. And then we gave this ads team ownership of that architecture. And we said, okay, we know the best architectures come from self-organizing teams. We have all these development teams. They're probably going to be in a very good position to define the architecture. But if they go in different directions, it's going to be a problem. So ads team, your responsibility is work with all the development teams, know what they're all doing, give input into the evolutionary process, the emergence process, give input, guide the conversations, publish standards. If this team decides that the architecture should look like this, you guys communicate it to everybody else so everybody knows. And somehow it'll all work out, you know, if we have a centralized group kind of paying attention to it. I thought it was pretty good, you know, for a first stab. We set it up that way and ran it that way for a number of months, and then tried to get feedback on how it was working. And the feedback that we got really was that, first of all, the development teams, even though they knew they were supposed to be evolving their own architecture, they were nervous about doing it because there was this ads team. And they were afraid to make decisions on their own without getting approval from the ads team. And you can probably see where that's going. If they need approval from the ads team, then you've got this little waterfall, you know, building itself into your process where they go talk to the ads team, try to make sure everything's okay. It's a checkpoint in everything they do. That was the first problem. The second problem is it felt like the ads team owned the architecture, and so the development teams didn't really feel responsible for it, right? They knew they had to play a role in evolving it, but it wasn't theirs. And since a lot of the developers had actually come from a waterfall background, we had just sort of taught them how to be agile, they thought it was somebody else's responsibility to create the architecture. You know, we'll just do the functions for the business. Somebody else had better set up functions for audit trailing, error logging, you know, whatever. The problem was that they were the only developers we had, you know, so who was going to do it exactly if they weren't doing it as part of the business logic they were creating? But we realized that it had something to do with this dynamic, you know, having this separate team that was the ads team. So on to experiment number 2. We made a little change. I said to the ads team, your job is to serve the developers. The developers are going to evolve the architecture. It's going to emerge from what they're doing, self-organizing, and you're going to help them. And so if the developers, as was the case, are trying to decide between ActiveMQ and RabbitMQ, then I don't want them spending their time researching them and doing proofs of concept. That's your job, ads team. So what you're going to do is you're going to facilitate meetings where the developers are trying to make decisions about architecture and design. You're going to facilitate those meetings as facilitators. You're going to try to be good facilitators. And you're going to try to get them to make decisions by the end of the meeting, because we know that's a problem. These things can go on and on. Your job is steer things towards decisions and help by doing research and little reference implementations and whatever. So we set out down that path for a little while. And again, feedback a few months later. The feedback was along the lines of, yeah, we still haven't decided if we're going to use ActiveMQ or RabbitMQ. Or I should say it was a little worse than that. We have decided. We've decided we're switching to RabbitMQ. And I said, okay. I'm not seeing it. And it turned out that, yeah, the facilitators did a great job of getting to a decision, but then what? You know, so, okay, we've decided on RabbitMQ, now we're going to switch. And turning it into implementation or execution was where it was falling apart. And that's sort of predictable too, I think, when you really think about it. Still, the teams don't feel like they own it. You know, no matter what, no matter how much you say to them, it's yours, these guys are there to help you. They still didn't actually own the implementation or have a good way to spread the work amongst themselves, you know, or decide how to turn it into execution. The bad news for all of you is I'm going to tell you the third experiment, but I don't know the results yet. So based on that feedback, we decided to make some changes. We made some changes. We actually have this team working with us now from an organization in the government called U.S. Digital Services. You might have read about it, where the Office of Management and the Budget, the White House essentially, has brought in teams from leading technology companies to come and work with us. A lot of people from Google especially. And we have one of those teams working with us. We have 5 people who are they're acting as my lead engineer in a way. They're sort of playing that role, working with the teams and coordinating and working side by side with the teams really and driving as peers. And their suggestion really was that one of the dynamics here is that you still have this ads team, you still have this architecture team, and nobody respects them because they're not developers. Developers respect developers. They want to see something. What are you doing? Not only that, but the ads team doesn't have a good enough feel for what the architecture needs to look like because they're not eating their own dog food. They're not actually taking part in using it. So if you're going to have these people at all, they have to be hands-on. They have to be creating stuff. And that's going to help solve this execution problem. So the third experiment we're trying now is a group, the ads team, that is going to try to create reusable components and platform architectural sorts of things, but actually create it, actually develop. And the rest of the teams are going to want to use those things because it's going to accelerate their own process. It's going to make things easier for them. So rather than an enforcement mentality where the separate architecture team is coming in and saying, do this, do this, do this, the architecture team essentially is entering a marketplace. They're creating stuff, and then they're selling it to the development teams. Here's something we've created. Don't you like this? It'll handle all your error logging for you and make your job much easier. So that's the next experiment that we're trying there. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's kind of my architecture as sales, I guess, paradigm. So that's our transformation program. I want to contrast it with our MyUSCIS and Did It programs, the other two. MyUSCIS, this is 2 teams working in Ruby on Rails, greenfield application. It's all about user-facing things, and it's all about trying to change the way that the government agency interacts with the public. So they developed an approach. They started, since it was greenfield, they built a continuous delivery pipeline right away, deploying into AWS. Absolute best practices, the leading things they could find that anybody else in the world was doing. They started doing that. And what they've started to do is build reusable components that they know will push things in the right direction for everybody else. So for example, they're creating Ruby gems for managing pieces of the user interface because they want everything to be not consistent in that direction so much as they want to push it in a way. They want to make it easy for developers to be developing along the lines that their vision is. So this is sort of expressing a vision through architectural components, maybe, is the approach. And we found an interesting side benefit, which is that it's easy for them when they're creating these reusable gems or whatever, they can rig up prototypes really quickly and easily. They can put something on the screen that they can show people. I saw a demo yesterday of a foreign language handling thing. It was kind of interesting. One of the problems that we have is all of these applications for immigration, they're all in English. And a lot of our applicants obviously are not native English speakers. You would think it would make a lot of sense to have a Spanish language version, for example, but it's not so obvious. For legal reasons, we don't want to have the possibility of a mistranslation or somebody thinking that something means something when it doesn't really mean that thing. For some of our benefits, people in theory need to be able to speak English. There are a lot of ins and outs and complications on this. The current plan is, yes, we are going to offer a Spanish language version of at least pieces of our system as a first test. But the problem is the answers have to be in English. because our adjudicators work in English and a lot of our legal requirements are in English. Yeah, I know this is the government, but you have to think about these things. So let's say we ask a question that's kind of an essay question. You know, it's not a simple check the box sort of thing, but you got to write a paragraph and answer to it. And the questions are in Spanish. Well, you might just, you know, type Spanish, right? It would be an easy mistake to make. So we're looking for a way to look at what people are typing and recognize that it's Spanish and give them a warning saying, no, you got to do this in English. That would be user-friendly, you know, that would be kind of cool. Yeah, endless recursion, right? We're going to be in a loop here. So the architecture folks on this project, they explored options. There are a few nice little open source tools and a few commercial tools. And they rigged up a nice reusable gem that gave a choice between the several different tools. And they made a nice little web page to test it out. And then we were able to show it to all the lawyers, all the senior leadership of the agency, and let them play with it. You know, try typing something, see what it does, see if that's the kind of thing that would work for you. It's especially exciting for us when we get something that's going to work for the lawyers. So in this case, this way of doing things has tremendous potential, I'll tell you. In this model, really it's about expressing the vision through the architecture and being able to get fast feedback cycles through actual creation again. Maybe that's the theme so far. The Did It project, this is the one, remember, that's going to get rid of my locally developed applications, all 506 of them that I don't know about. And we have a team, this is going to be a single code base that looks like multiple applications. That's the way we do it. So we need something really fast to handle cases of violence against women, for example, which is a category of applications that we need to process. So with this project, we create a standard tool set, a standard sort of wrapper, and a single application. And then we can quickly create the thing for the VAWA cases, the violence against women. And then we need something else to speed up temporary protected status when we grant it suddenly to people from Haiti, that if they're in this country, they can stay here until, I guess it was put in place after the earthquake there, way back. So these are things that, you know, happen all of a sudden. We need to respond to them. So here we want a tool set and an application framework that we can use for all of these different uses. And so because that was the core idea of it in the first place, architecturally it was all about how can we build things that have everything in place so that developers can really quickly build something and get it into production. When we put in the DevOps pipeline, this added tremendous value right off the bat, right? Because now we had this automated way to get stuff to production quickly. But still there's this architectural question of how do you set it up? And in this case, you're willing to take trade-offs. You're willing to standardize and force all the applications to do something in a certain way because you want to make it as fast as possible to create an application. And if the user interface isn't as nice, or we have to take trade-offs in how we handle the business processes, that's okay. So this one for me is the trade-off question. Here our architecture isn't about supporting the business functions in particular. It isn't about optimizing for cost or anything like that. It's about optimizing for speed of delivery and trying to set up the application that way. So we've had these different things. This is sort of our laboratory. We got to work with each of these and try to see what the consequences would be. And I can tell you what some of my hypotheses are, my learnings, at least for the sake of argument, having been through these different projects and seeing how they've gone and tried these experiments in the transformation program. So let me try a few of these out on you. I don't know if we're going to have time for Q&A afterwards, or if you can just come after me afterwards and give me an argument on these. But this is the way I'm reading it so far. So the first thing is, in our traditional approach to architecture, the goal was standardization and enforcing standards or enforcing certain ways of doing the architecture. But I think what's going to work much better in a DevOps environment is architecture as an enabler rather than as a constraint. Here we want to optimize our cycle time. What I want is an architecture that's going to make it really quick for me to throw things into an application, gives me lots of flexibility, doesn't assume very much about what I'm going to want to do, but instead gives me potential. So I think that was, in a way, that's kind of the lesson of our Did It application and our MyUSCIS application. Second, I find that architectures actually do emerge. You know, that teams are actually quite effective in creating architectures, and you don't want to lose that, right? You don't want to put in place a control structure that's going to stop them from innovating and being creative, because it's actually very effective, and it's hard for people to do who aren't hands-on creating code, arguably. You know, I know when you scale bigger and bigger, it gets harder to have everybody creating code. But there's tremendous value, actually, in having the people who are creating the architecture also be the people who are in this marketplace for creating components that people are going to use, at least. The third thing is we became very conscious of the danger in removing responsibility for architecture from the development teams. That's maybe the flip side of that. So, you know, the problem in many ways is less about whether you're going to impose architecture. It's more about whether the teams actually own their architecture and have responsibility for it, because if they don't, you start to get the effects we saw in this transformation program where things fall between the cracks. Either they don't want to make decisions, or they don't want to execute the decisions, or they get nervous and afraid, and they start to try to find people who can rubber stamp the decisions for them. If we really are going to have a bunch of teams operating, and they're going to be operating looking for fast cycle time, I keep going back to that. As I said, that was one of our goals in moving to a DevOps approach. Then we have to have some sort of a decentralized approach to architecture governance, to the extent that there is governance at all, right? If you're going to have these 15 teams working in parallel, trying to move as fast as they can, anything that requires them to check before they do something with an outside body is going to add wait time and add process time to your cycle time. And so whatever solution we wind up finding to all of this has to take that into consideration. It can't involve, you know, the guy up on or the people across the street who you have to check with before you do anything, at least in line with the creation of the system. I think this is the last thing. Almost the last thing. The question of architectural runway. I know this has, it's something we've debated a lot. On this transformation program, essentially we had people piloting the system for about a year before we actually had the developers start using it. There was this huge architectural runway. And the problem that we found is there's no feedback on anything during that period. So they're often running for a year. I mean, there's feedback from technical experts. There was feedback from me. I kind of like this. This kind of looks good. But it was in a vacuum, and we almost had to reinvent it when the teams actually started developing the user-facing features. You know, we had to keep thinking, is this still the right way? ActiveMQ, RabbitMQ, you know. All of these decisions that had been made had to be remade once we started to get feedback and put stuff into production and see how it worked. So I have not been a fan of the idea of creating a lot of runway, especially if I'm looking at reducing cycle time and looking at reducing cycle time for first releases as well. If you're going to do a period of building architectural runway, then you're lengthening at least the cycle time over your first release. And to me, that's in many ways the most important one, because that's where you need to validate your product in the first place. You need to get something out to the market and make sure that it's actually going to work for users. So again, hypothesis here, we're going to have to test this some more. But I wish that these teams had been more comfortable working without runway. They kind of felt like, well, we need somebody else to tell us what's going to work. We need somebody else to set up the basic architecture. And we don't want to take risks on it ourselves. And I guess that's kind of the trade-off there. But next time I try this, I would go in the direction of let's build user functionality today, refactor, and worry about it later. That probably contradicts everything everybody's been saying for the last 3 days, right? All right. Last thing, there's a lot of talk about loose coupling around architectures in a DevOps environment. And I think it's the right approach intuitively, certainly, because what we need to do is decouple the work of different teams so they could proceed at their own pace and not have to worry about dependencies. Dependencies cause wait time. It kills you when you're trying to reduce cycle time. We did find, though, that there's a trade-off. There's a big trade-off, or a number of them. First of all, when you're loosely coupling systems, microservices, we actually use ESB for interfaces with legacy systems, you do still have to agree on the interface. And that turns out to be harder than one would think. Not just on the syntax of the interface, but the semantics also. You have to understand what you're going to be getting when you communicate with another service. It became hard for us to test these in some cases. If you have different groups working on different services and they're working on different cycles, then if something goes wrong in your test, trying to diagnose the problem when you're crossing the boundaries of different services with different service governance, that was hard. We found that we had to devote a lot of effort to building defensively. So, you know, you're going to interface with another service, and you think you know what it's going to do, but what if it doesn't, right? How careful do you want to be? So what we've been finding a lot of is, make the service call, and then validate absolutely every assumption you have about what it did, and handle anything that didn't really work the way you thought it was going to work. And especially when you're trying to work out of sync, where you're not trying to coordinate changes. Well, if your piece is changing and the other service is not changing, then you have to make sure you're still communicating with it the way it thinks you want to communicate with it temporarily until it catches up with you and so on. So you wind up with a lot of that sort of coordination that resolves itself when you think defensively and say, we better be able to handle just about anything that happens. It's still, I like the idea of the decoupled services or loosely coupled services, but we did find that it adds a bunch of work because you do have to be defensive when you're programming against those interfaces. So what we learned, I think, is first you think about the framework that you're going to use for testing those interactions and the framework you're going to use for, or the standards you're going to have for how defensive your code has to be or how resilient for unexpected behavior. And then you can move with confidence, let's say. Once you got those things in place, then you're going to surface anything with the tests as right away when you have a disintegration of the expected relationship. So these were our learnings, trying to fool around with architecture a little bit in a DevOps environment, kind of in 3 different laboratory settings, to not make assumptions about how architecture was going to work in these environments. We knew the old model wasn't going to work for us. We kind of knew some of the characteristics of what sort of solution we wanted to move towards, but we figured we don't know the right answers here. This is new to us. Let's try things. Let's try things in a few different settings and see what kinds of results we get. So I hope that helps after a long week of hearing people speak about these things or hearing opinions. I don't really know what was in these sessions, but I just wanted to sort of share as a thought process what we went through, what we tried, and where we are now. And I'm very open. I'd love to hear ideas from anybody I have a chance to talk to here on what else we can try, what you think will come from our experiments and what else we should be doing. So thank you all. And congratulations on making it through the week. Oh, good, sure.
Let's take a couple of questions. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So you spent a lot of time elaborating kind of the internal changes in the shape of how you worked. You alluded a little bit to how it changed your interactions with the legal team. How else did it change your interactions with your stakeholders and how you served your customers?
Yeah. We've had to, as we were making this move towards DevOps, we had to think about a lot of things that were constraining us, right? There, you can imagine in a government environment, there would be lots of things that would impede your progress, let's say, towards that. We had to think about security and how we could show people that security is even more robust in this model, which is what I believe. That's the case I've been making. We had to deal with oversight mechanisms and how oversight works in the government and even the politics of it to some extent. We had to deal with how we were overseeing contractors, how we could make sure that contractors were performing since we depend on them for almost everything. So there really was this wide arena of new approaches we had to evolve as we went forward with it. And we did a lot of what I think are very creative things to try to keep the spirit of what we were trying to do while still meeting requirements. To give you a little sense of this, the way we worked with contractors on this FADS contract, that's our Flexible Agile Development Services contract. This is where the development teams were coming from. What we did was we awarded the contract to 4 different contractors, and we told each of them, you're going to give us 2 teams, 2 Agile teams, so we'll have 8 teams all together, and they're all going to be working on the same project. We're going to have a product owner who feeds you requirements. Your job is to be really productive, be really innovative, and produce high-quality work. And after every 6 months, we're going to adjust the number of teams from each contractor. So if we like working with you, maybe we'll take 4 teams from you, 3 from the other guy, 2 from that one, and we'll get rid of the last one or something. You know, we'll rebalance, and we'll do that every 6 months. So effectively, you're all in competition with each other. You want to impress us, show us everything you've got, show us why you're, what you can do that the other guys can't do. Only one trick to this. We're going to be evaluating your performance in terms of productivity, quality, et cetera, and how well you collaborate with the other contractors. So it's a co-opetition kind of situation, right? They want to show us how great they are, but they can't do it by pointing fingers at the other guys. And it's wonderful, actually. It's working beautifully because when you actually get a bunch of really good developers in a room, they don't care who they work for. They just want to help each other and show off how great they are and that sort of thing. So we had to invent new approaches to procurement that way. We had to figure out how overseers should be overseeing Agile and DevOps sorts of projects. And for me, that's all about sales. I think I said that before. There's a certain amount of my job that is sales, pure sales. Okay, Mr. Overseer, here's the problem you have now. You have programs that are coming to you every 2 years to check in, and that's your point of governance. And within 2 years, they've probably gone off the rails, and they're doing all sorts of horrible things, and you don't know about it because 2 years have gone by. How about if instead of that, every month I show you, or every 2 weeks, I show you a finished product, and I show you where we are on the schedule with a burn down chart, and by the way, we're going to use a lean process and eliminate waste, and we're going to have frequent feedback from users, and I have a more robust security model. What are your problems, and let me show you how to solve them using this approach that we're using. So that was the general idea, anyway. Long answer could be a lot longer, and it was long enough already.
I want to present you with this certificate, and we also have a charger for your cell phone, which I trust is below the threshold of what you're allowed to
I hope
accept
so, yeah.
as a token of our thanks. So thank you.
you.
Mark Schwartz.
Thanks.